everybody. American Thought Project here. Nick and Robert again here to talk to you about politics and the lens of current events. Today's date is June 4th, 2020. So obviously we are still amidst all of the protesting, and there's also violence happening across the country. And today we kind of want to have a chat about a group that is called Antifa. Everybody knows who they are. It stands for, the anti-fascist movement. So it's a movement and it's a group of people, but we just kind of want to have a discussion about, who they are and kind of what they're doing and what's going on today. So, Robert, what is Antifa? Like, who are these people?
Well, I think baseline, they don't even really know who they are, first of all. And most of your research, if anyone wants to dig into it, is going to lead you there too. It's utterly contradictory in many cases. But the short of it is, hey, their motto is, we want to oppose fascism by any means necessary. And those means just so happen to also include fascist tactics. So that's an important point. But essentially what we've seen them do over the last few years is just wreak havoc and use either political or civil issues as opportunities to try and destroy institutions. And I think one of their strategies is by causing mass havoc and pitting groups of people against each other. That's actually the more effective method of destroying institutions, right? The actual act of the chaos isn't, but if that in turn sows seeds of discord within different factions in the country or in the specific institutions, like if you can turn the city police force against each other, I think a unintended consequence, in my opinion, but if I'm trying to put my strategic hat on as an Antifa thug, you see Mayor Garcetti in Los Angeles playing into their hand by saying, well, we're going to defund the police force in LA by $150 million. This is stripping the institution apart piece by piece. So that's really their goal.
They're an anarchist movement, right? They've been labeled as anarchists.
In some cases, yeah. I think that is probably a fault of the folks labeling them as that, just like, oh, anyone who just wants to destroy everything is just an anarchist, and that's a part of it. But there's this interesting conundrum, right, with anarchy and leftist totalitarian values, and they're kind of being conflated, and this group Antifa kind of has both.
Because I've had those two as the opposite ends of the spectrums.
Right. So
and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah. So let's expand on that here in a second. But I think the short of it is they really, in practice, their goal is just to wreak havoc on society. They say that they want to...
Isn't it like fight fascism at any cost or something like that?
Yeah, and they want to just oppose any type of authoritarian or authority structure. So the police force could be seen as a authority structure. They want to rip that down. Political, fundamental structures to our republic are things that they want to break down. In their world, every person would live completely free to do whatever they want.
Good luck with that.
May sound good in theory, but when there's no objective law and a blind arbiter of that law, everything is subjective.
Right. Yeah. So like it says here, they campaign against anything that they view as authoritarian, homophobic, racist, xenophobic. Although they're not like really affiliated with other movements on the left, because it's just kind of like, so why don't we just discuss like how we view left and right? Because I Googled, I think this is a pretty common question. What is the difference between fascism and communism? And I Googled it, and I was like looking at the images on Google, and it was all these like spectrums, and I was like, okay, this is just completely wrong. I mean, at least if not wrong, at least different than how we view it. So I feel like left and right is
Right.
often talked about today. And so let's just kind of briefly lay out how we see left versus right. And I believe you'll agree with me on this. We view left and right based on size of government.
Right.
And again, this is not meant to label right and wrong, good and evil. It's just a measuring stick.
Right.
So at the super far left, you would see a totalitarian state, a state that has total control over all of its subjects in whatever form that may be. So that could be monarchy, any other dictator, any central authority that has total control.
Right.
And therefore, its equal and opposite reaction on the super far right would be anarchy. No government at all whatsoever.
Right.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah. So to me, it's totalitarian, anarchy. Those are the opposite ends. And if we can, we'll probably try and throw this graphic that we've kind of built up on the screen, or leave a link to it in the comments. But totalitarian and anarchy, another way to say that is complete tyranny or complete freedom. The problem is, people hear complete freedom and they say, "Oh, wow, that sounds great."
Yeah, it sounds awesome.
When everyone's completely free to do whatever they want, irrespective of law, moral law, or law put forth by the state that's been given authority through the voting of the people and the consent of the people, there really is a barrier to exercise that freedom, because you have no securing of that freedom outside of brute force. So that's the spectrum: anarchy, totalitarian. And I'd say today, our typical broad Republican Party, kind of traditional blue dog Democrat, is kind of somewhere slightly right to the middle. Okay. Yeah. And then if you think about America, think about a more totalitarian state and a monarchy. The liberal thought in that era wasn't left. We think liberal is left today. We moved to the right of a monarchy. We moved more freedom. Anytime you're getting more freedom into the hands of the people, more liberty, you're moving towards the right.
That's interesting. I don't think I've heard that one. It's, if we were breaking away from a monarchy in the 1700s to a more looser form of central government, right, by definition moved to a little bit to the right. Yeah, as I see it today, the idea of what a Republican and a Democrat is Republicans are central right and Democrats are central left. At least that's just generally the idea of what the parties are supposed to represent when it comes to size of government.
Right. Yeah, and I think if you look at the writings and just understand the definitions by context of the day, they've changed. But Thomas Jefferson writes and tries to appeal to King George. He says, "Open your mind and your heart to liberal ideals." Well, liberty, it's rooted in individual liberty. So a classical liberal, or a traditional definition of liberalism, is actually on the right side of the spectrum. Today, that term has been changed, and your modern day liberal is on the left. They have that title, but the true definition of liberal, think about it, liberty is in the word.
Yeah.
So more individual liberty.
The pursuit of liberty is liberal.
It is on the right, but we're just using that term in a different way, in the not correct way, to describe the modern day left. So I think one thing to point out that we see just misrepresented, and it's just outright wrong, and it's all over the place, is this idea that there is an equal and opposite version of total leftist, communist, totalitarian rule on the right. It is not.
Yeah, because I've seen that, right? I've seen Nazism as the super far right.
Right.
Which is a fascist state.
Right. That's wrong. The right-wing dictator doesn't exist. That term is an oxymoron, because anytime you control more of the individual's life, you are by definition moving towards the left. This idea that super capitalism and far right-wing is dictator or fascist is wrong, because capitalism is the idea that's rooted in voluntary exchange. ultimate liberty of two free
You have to be
people.
free to exchange goods and services
Yes,
in order for it to exist.
right. So people just, they blindly accept the fact, well, if there's something bad on the far left, then there should be something bad on the far right,
Well, anarchy.
which,
Well, I'm wrong. Hold on. I mean, anarchy is bad.
right,
I
I was
mean,
going to say to
anarchy
some
means
extent,
there's nothing to stop me from, going, killing my
right,
neighbor, taking his chickens, and stealing his wife. Right? Like
right,
that's and several thousand years ago, that was a pretty serious problem. So they needed some form of government to
right,
prevent your neighbors from doing that to one another.
right, exactly. So, yeah, I don't say that to say there's not an equal bad. I would say I would prefer anarchy much more over complete leftism, because at least I'm free to make my decisions and myself however I want.
Well, that's because your neighbor hasn't tried to steal your chickens and your wife.
Yeah, I don't want to get in any bread lines in Soviet Russia, though.
That's true. That's
I'll
true.
take my
And just
chances.
yeah. And by the way, just a quick pause for conservatives that are watching this. Notice we just said 5 minutes ago, liberalism is not bad. It's not a bad word.
Right.
I think that word is thrown around, ironically, too liberally today. Liberty comes from the word. I mean, liberal comes from the word liberty. It's one of the three core American values. It's on our coinage.
Right.
So just remember that before we bash the idea of liberalism, because, hey, like you said, Jefferson, I encourage you to think about liberal thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know that we're going to win back. We will win back the true definition. When I say we, people who want to just have the truth, that the true definition of liberalism, that will not be won back until the education system is not so one-sided.
Well, that's another conversation.
Yeah. But so just really quick to wrap up kind of the spectrum idea. So you got anarchy, far right, totalitarianism, far left. Americanism is to the right.
Center right.
Classical
center
liberal,
right.
Yeah. Well, I would say it's more right than center right. Like
Okay.
on this graphic, there's not enough space, but you've got like the middle, and then I think 3/4 of the way to anarchy or whatever is probably like the spectrum of American conservatism or Americanism. You've got classical liberal, you've got conservative that's a little bit further right. And libertarian is kind of the extreme conservative, so to speak, would be libertarian.
But still respects some form of government.
Right. Yeah. Right. But conservative.
That's interesting. Then the next one's Confederation of States, which we were grappling with that problem during the formation of the country.
Yeah. Yeah. So you get a little taste of anarchy to some extent when you cannot enforce any type of law because states will make their own currency, or they
won't relinquish any power of any kind to any central government. So they're just all doing their own thing. It's like Greek city states.
Yeah, there's essentially it's an interesting thought project. When you think of sacrificing a small piece of your liberty actually helps you further your liberty, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that you do submit this monopoly on offensive force to a centralized entity, you're actually furthering your individual liberty. I can now live out my life without as much risk of someone breaking into my house and stealing things, because I know there's an arbiter of the law. I know there's an objective law, and I know that justice in this country should be blind. So the fact that those institutions exist, my liberty to walk outside and not have to be completely strapped to the gills to keep all of my possessions, that I'm more free. I'm more free to exercise these things by actually giving up, or I don't want to say giving up, loaning out.
Okay. So let me bring it full circle. So who are these Antifa lunatics? They cannot be anarchy, which is super far right, and leftist at the same time. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So who are these people?
I don't know that I've come to kind of this perfect intellectual understanding of it, because they're leveraging anarchist tactics and they want to strip structures away, but they use leftist, what's the term I'm looking for? Like stormtrooper, brown shirt style tactics, where they are, it is to some degree fascist to silence anyone that doesn't agree with you by force, by a boycott, protest, doxing, all of these different things, all the way down to character assassination, in a public square. All these things. Those are fascist and leftist tactics in hopes of achieving
a far right goal.
Yeah. So I don't know exactly how you really get to anarchy without leftist tactics. I mean, I think we'd probably want to do more research on this guy Godwin, who kind of was like the father of anarchy, but he describes anarchy as something completely different than what we hear today. He more talks about it. Anarchy is a form of government or constitution in which public or private consciousness formed through the development of science and law is alone sufficient to maintain order and guarantee all liberties. That was actually a guy named Pierre Proudhon.
Oh, that's a lovely magical world. Can I go there?
Yeah, we'll put a link on that below, and then here's actually what I meant to read. So Godwin thinks the end of the reliance on the state will also herald the disappearance of crime, violence, war, and poverty. What utopia was this dude living in?
Wow. So if we get rid of police, we won't have any more crime? Is that?
Yeah. Crime and violence are deterred by the fear of retaliation or the fear of, some sort of prevention or, just laws. The fact that justice will be acted, that's what deters crime. We are not inherently good. We're not just going to act good all the time, left to our complete own devices. That's a topic.
We wouldn't need any laws ever if that were the case.
If angels lived amongst men, there would be no need, right? Well,
if your conscience was your guide, and it was a good guide, we would have no need for laws at all.
Yeah.
Because everyone would just do the right thing. But that's obviously people disagree on what the right thing is.
What Federalist paper is that where Madison says if angels lived among men, there'd be no need for government, and if angels governed men, there'd be no need to restrain it? That's a utopia.
Wow.
I forget what Federalist paper that is. I think that's a quote. We can put it in a link below to that. But to say, this guy, the traditional definition of anarchy really isn't what we hear about it today. So I think it's just a case of one of those mislabeling things. They want nothing. They want absolutely nothing. And they think we're just going to act good after that. Well, if there's no structure and you just think we're acting good, you guys are beating people, burning things down, stealing things, destroying things. You're clearly not inherently good people. So if there's not a structure in place to keep your ass in line.
But they're going to be good as soon as government's on.
Yeah. I won't hold my breath on that one.
Yeah. So what do you think their objective is? Like, I mean, they're just causing chaos, but to what end? What is the end game?
I don't think they have an end game other than they just like.
There's got to be one. I mean, there has to be one. I mean, there's a lot of people on the political right that are pretty confident that George Soros funds them.
Right.
I don't know if that's true or not. That's a pretty common theory on the political right. And we know that he is a leftist by every definition of the word.
I mean, I guess based on what I know now, I think their end game is to just destroy institutions, right?
Okay.
And the reason why that kind of pits against the political right more is because a conservative, by definition, has reverence for institutions. They have reverence for things that already exist and are very prudent to change because there is this, repeat myself again, reverence for the idea that there's been thousands of years of trial and error to get us where we are. We should have some sort of respect for mores and traditions and values of the culture. Because they've gotten us to where we are. So I think it's actually in the Declaration of Independence where they say prudence indeed, or Jefferson writes, prudence indeed shall dictate when change is needed, something to that effect, that you need to be prudent when change. You shouldn't just knee jerk and just throw things into some sort of, oblivion. And the American Revolution was the prime example of that. It was
very slow process.
Yeah, it was it was evolution more than a revolution, right? The colonies wanted to stay a part of Great Britain for a long time. They just wanted to be treated justly and to have representation, and to not have their rights trampled, as compared.
And it wasn't until the government was uncontrollably destructive to those ends.
Yeah, exactly.
That we said enough was enough. So, I mean, I want to challenge the idea that they're just trying to destroy institutions to then create anarchy. I'm not really buying that. Again, that's just the idea that they're wreaking all this havoc to then just give up and go home whenever the government's gone. I feel like they're probably destroying institutions so that they can rebuild society to their likeness.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty sure that's what every revolution is trying to do, no matter what it is. And whether you view it as right or wrong or good or evil is not relevant. They are trying to tear something down to rebuild it in what they're trying to accomplish.
So isn't that a little bit of an oxymoron then for them to say, yeah, there's anarchists in here? Well, maybe they're using the anarchists for their tactics, and then they're going to ditch them and build up the leftist utopia where they control everything. Right?
After they've smashed everything to the ground, then they're going to rock it back to the total opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah. I mean, I think just this, it is a complete joke of an ideology. It is a complete just perversion of any type of civility or society that anyone would want to live in. And this idea that they just want to oppose fascism is a crock. It's an absolute crock of horse manure. But why is it a crock? Because like you said, once they destroy everything, they're not going to build it up and let people choose, because the people chose to build what we have. So they're going to say, no, it has to be built this way. And you even see that in their in their, riots and beating of people and destroying of things. I don't know what the word for that is. Mayhem processions. Anyone who disagrees with them, they shout down. This is leftist with a capital L, not on the political left, but leftist. This is brown shirt tactics. This is SS tactics. This is, KGB tactics, where you completely suppress folks who do not agree with you. So they clearly have complete totalitarian leftist values. They just maybe are using some of the same anarchist strategies, right? And I just think that term really isn't being applied very well.
So let me challenge you here. Obviously you and I have no love for Antifa. And most people on the political right do not like them. I think people on the political left are probably mixed. They may like some of the things that the causes that they're going for, but they don't agree with the methods in which they're executing it. So here's a challenge. The Trump administration has labeled them as a terrorist organization, which will unleash a huge realm of tools, including like CIA, other intelligence assets, military, to be able to combat that. And let's remember, these are American citizens on American soil, and they just so happen to be a group that you and I don't agree with on a political basis. And we are labeling them as terrorist organizations and pretty much giving the green light to start, schwacking people.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile
that? That's a difficult one, right? Because American citizens have rights here.
Due process is the first one.
Yeah. So I don't know. I need to dig in a little bit to that. It's easy to say, hey, they're exercising terrorist tactics in the streets. They are terrorizing people, innocent people. So from that aspect,
and the colonists used to be terrorists to Great Britain. Literally.
I don't know that I would agree that they would terrorize, just completely destroy a bunch of private property.
No, but they declared war, effectively instigating violence to achieve a political end.
Yeah, I think that's different than
that's the definition of terrorism.
I think it's different than the American Revolution specifically. They didn't go about it by destroying things in the streets and maiming and beating and in some cases killing people just for being somewhere, right? There was a
Yeah.
targeted in, and there were pleas and diplomacy pleas that well preceded it, right? I mean, in terms of violence, Great Britain was the aggressor in response to a political uprising that they did not like anymore, and people who were just refusing to go by unjust laws. So I think there's a difference there.
Yeah.
But
And
not to get too far down on that nerd track, I think there's a constitutional problem with it. I think I need to look into it. My knee-jerk
yeah.
reaction is yes, these people are traitors to our country. They are terrorizing innocent people. So I think from that end, I'm like, okay, well, if you've been
Do
put
what you
on
got to do.
notice, yeah, if you've been put on notice,
That's also interesting. They have been publicly put on notice.
so
It's not a secret.
yeah, I think we should probably do some digging on the constitutional implications here.
Well, I mean, this is my thought on it. You know, everyone with that first of all is willing to be arrested, I guess. Everyone deserves due process. This comes back to George Floyd and everything that's been happening and how terrible that was.
Yeah.
Everyone is entitled to due process. That is a fundamental right as an American. Now, obviously, if you choose to not be arrested, like I wouldn't expect the 9/11 hijackers, if they had survived, to like just give up freely.
Right.
You know, that's what leads to war, is unreconcilable differences.
Right.
But where you are willing to engage in civil discourse, you have to be guaranteed the right of due process, no matter how the federal government labels you. Because again, one day, I don't know, political right could be, you know, a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure I meet the specific definition of a domestic terrorist according to Hillary Clinton. It's like a white military-aged ex-Middle East military service. Like I meet like every single criteria.
Yeah.
So remember, like one day you could be called a terrorist. So I just think we need to remember that due process is a fundamental right that we guarantee to everybody within reason.
Yeah, if you give the state the power to do something because you like the outcome today, just know that they have that power now to do the same thing to you when you don't agree with it, right? So yeah, I completely agree. I think a couple things we'd have to come to agreement on. I don't know that Antifa has a political end that they've stated. Like just ripping down institutions isn't really a political end. I think that's just a process. They don't really have a stated end. All they do is try and strip things down, which I mean you could say is a synonym for destroy things. So if they want to just rip down institutions, and they want to do it by violence, I mean they're not doing it by peaceful protest. They're not doing it by gaining consent of the people, right? The government has its authority, its just authority through the consent of the people. We give the authority to the government. So if they have a political end, then there needs to be consent of the people to achieve the political end. They're not doing that. They're just destroying things. They're just beating people with sticks. They're just, lighting things on fire. So I don't know that they really have a political end any more than your common, armed robbery criminal has a political
end. And the saddest thing of all, regardless of all the Antifa, Antifa's been, rising and falling in, prevalent society for a while now. The saddest thing of all, though, given today is June 4th. And we are still absolutely in the middle of all the protesting and the outrage about the treatment of the Black American community. It's a travesty that organizations like Antifa are just absolutely dominating the spotlight. I mean, you can't not cover that.
Yeah.
They are literally like burning stuff down.
Yeah.
So it's a real big shame that it's distracting from the real message of bringing unity to the country.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if Antifa would take this as a compliment or a criticism. It's not all Antifa, right? I think there's a number of different groups. So if Antifa wants all the credit, well, you're coming up short, folks. But if you don't want the credit, then I guess it's the compliment. But there's just common criminals out there too, you know?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I saw videos of New York City last night, and just on random streets, it is just utter mayhem of
Macy's, Nike stores, Apple stores,
yeah,
Amazon trucks, trains full of stuff, Tiffany's. I mean, it's literally about Jordans and flat screens.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely shameful.
Right. So we could go address one of two things here. I think it might be interesting to talk a little bit more about fascism, since Antifa is supposed to be anti-fascist.
Right.
So what is fascism, right? We talked about how folks, they think it's right. Oh, it's you're an extreme right fascist. Well, let me read you the definition of fascism. Often capitalized, a political philosophy, movement, or regime, such as that of the fascisti, that exalts nation and often race above the individual, and that stands for a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. All right, Nick, of that definition, what is congruent with right-wing libertarian ideology?
I'm coming up short.
Yeah. So the nation,
it's totalitarian by design.
Yeah, the nation above the individual. That's statism. Left. It stands for a centralized autocratic government.
Yeah.
Left. So there's no right-wing fascist. That's a lie.
It doesn't make any sense at all.
It's complete a joke. I would recommend a book by Jonah Goldberg. He wrote it a number of years ago called Liberal Fascism. Really, really good. It talks about Nazism, communism, fascism, and then the fascist tendencies of the modern day right. Okay, not to be confused for fascism on the political spectrum right, but of the modern day political party right, and the tendencies to want to force rule, right? I think the reason there's restraint on the government is because as a human, you want to kind of enforce your way of doing things. I mean, in leadership, that's what you do as a business leader. I have a strategy and an idea that I think is optimum, and I enforce that with my team, right? Not in a bad way or with a club or with threat of imprisonment, but, you know, so I just use that as a point that it's natural human tendency to want to enforce what you think is optimum. And that becomes a problem when your idea of optimum is race above anything, state above anything.
I also want to challenge the idea of race, because I personally think that the Nazi Party and that regime, the Third Reich, was uniquely racist. It was uniquely built on a racial identity, because Mussolini in Italy was not racist. Franco in Spain was not racist, nor was it totalitarian. It was more authoritarian, which is close but not the same. I mean, Castro in Cuba, he's not known to be a racist.
Yeah.
So I think there's plenty of dictatorships that we've seen around the world, which are by fascism is defined by a single totalitarian, or at least a single ruler over a people. I think there are plenty of fascist regimes that are not racist at all, much less systematically murdering one race in particular, like the Nazis did. So I think that the Nazis had a very unique form of racism and fascism. So it's hard to just immediately point to that and say, oh, that's what fascism is. I feel like that's a pretty unique breed.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, I think, this is coming from the Webster Dictionary. Just because something's written down and someone decided it was fact doesn't make it true. I think more or less.
The world used to be flat, and that was a fact.
Yeah, exactly. So word of caution, when you get into these arguments or debates about, it's a international law that XYZ, that, education is a right and this and that and stuff. Well, newsflash, international fill in the blank has no jurisdiction or sovereignty over America. Sorry.
Yeah.
Next.
So I think kind of the big lessons for today are, one, we don't really know what the heck these Antifa guys are doing. We don't really know how to classify them, and it's kind of challenging. And there's no such thing as fascism on the right. Like that's counterintuitive.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
and three, we definitely condemn all of the violence that's going on right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how people can gullibly believe that fascist is on the political right. It's literally the antithesis to every libertarian, conservative.
There ever was.
To control the economy, to have control on any type of social, regiments. It's completely. I mean, Mussolini, who was kind of this first figure fascist. Everything within the state, nothing outside of the state. So right. That is completely far left, leftist, total control. And I think that's another spectrum you can think of it, right? Totalitarian anarchy, tyranny, freedom, more control, less control of the central government.
But by the way, something I forgot to add was on what it is to be fascist and what Antifa is standing for. One thing that I do know is a component of fascism is that it's typically characterized by a class structure. That is pretty common. And obviously the ones on top are the ruling party, right? Nazi party members, if you will. And then there is definitely a more concrete assignment of roles in society, whether both in the economic environment and also the gender roles are assigned in a very, very strict way. And I think that is something that is associated with fascism. And I know that Antifa hates that. Right. Antifa hates any idea of a class system because it by nature creates inequality.
Right. And so there's probably some elements of truth that they are anti-fascist.
Right.
The fact that any type of government institution exists is fascist that's not true.
That's just nonsense.
When the state is the end in and of itself, that's fascist. When there are governmental institutions that are put there by the consent of the people, that's the opposite of fascism. That's a constitutional republic with democratic attributes. I think you're exactly right. Antifa really doesn't know, in my opinion, what the hell they want to do except destroy things. I don't think they have a true political end. They're more so opportunist. They do want to destroy things, but they don't.
They are definitely opportunists.
They don't know what they want to do once they do destroy things. And then, right-wing dictator, that's an oxymoron, doesn't exist. Fascism is a leftist idea. It's not a right. Far right is anarchy.
Yeah. Well, to close this out here, I hope that these protests in the wake of George Floyd go as long as they need to go, but I hope that this violence is put down as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion there.
100%.
Anyway, anything else, Robert?
No, I think, this conversation brings up a couple of good things. I'd like to do a deep dive maybe next time on the government's response, kind of like we did last time, but the government's response to Antifa. How is our government that is putting
the protesting and the riots, all of it?
Yeah. So the government's put in place its first and only just end is to secure and further our individual rights. Well, when Antifa's running amok in the streets, our rights are threatened. So what's the government doing in response? They should have a response, and it needs to be good. So
they should also be supporting all the peaceful protests and ensuring that those people are able to protest peacefully if someone's trying to stop that.
Yeah, 100%. So it's kind of that right there, that's a great example. Those people's right to assemble peacefully, to speak their mind, have their freedom of speech is being trampled. So the government has a duty to uphold that right. And I think as a teaser, we could say that ain't been happening too well across the country. So let's get into that next time.
All right, guys. American Thought Project. Till next time. Thank you, guys.
Be well.